no, I appreciate you all taking your time. I'm sure you're looking forward to that whiskey tasting. I didn't get the Irish whiskey myself, so I grabbed my own little bottle to enjoy while listening to the sommelier. But to kick things off, I'll start with an introduction. I think about half of the audience is aware of Okta or current customer. The other half might be looking at Okta. But just so to be upfront, I want to start with who we are. Okta was founded in 2009, just as cloud solutions such as Salesforce, Box, and others were starting to grow rapidly. The goal of Okta when we were created was really to streamline access to those cloud applications while giving IT some level of control over those unmanaged applications. Now, over the last decade, Okta has grown into a full-featured cloud platform, supporting the IAM needs of over 15,000 customers worldwide. And I like to put our vision on here because it really tells you what we're about. And it's about accelerating a world where everyone can safely use any technology. So as Mark said, who am I? I'm a senior SE. I've been doing this for 12 years. This is the third IAM vendor I've worked for during those 12 years. So as I mentioned, I've done a lot in the healthcare side of the world, but for the last 3+ years, I've been multi-vertical, dealing with things such as user lifecycle management, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, and things of that nature. And given that this is a whiskey tasting, I thought I'd throw my little ancestry thing in here, even though my last name is McHugh and even my mother's maiden name is Sweeney. Unfortunately, I'm only 4% Irish, but hey, I got a little bit in me. Turns out I'm more Scottish than Irish. But that's it for the intros. We'll kick into this, and I promise I'm not going to kill you with slides. I think I've got about 8 total, but I will spend a couple of times on a couple of them. So let's kick things off. In order to discuss zero trust, we really need to look at where it originated. In the past, corporate resources were contained within a single internal network. IT's job was to protect this internal network. Essentially, the old way assumes a trusted network protected by the network perimeter. You had firewalls, routers, DMZs, and other solutions to lock down this network perimeter. Outside this trusted network perimeter was where the bad guys lived. Inside, you consider it trusted where, quote unquote, the good people lived. I like to visualize like a castle protecting the king and queen. The castle has the large walls, has a moat to keep the enemies out. You had the guards monitoring the castle perimeter to protect that royal family. So this security model, both in my castle example, as well as the corporate example, is problematic because when that perimeter is breached, an attacker has relatively easy access to your internal resources. This was a risk organizations were willing to take, though, because it provided enough security to satisfy their needs. So what changed? Well, the way in which users access resources and the way in which organizations utilize those resources blew up this old way of protection. As the title of the slide states, cloud and mobile have dissolved the network perimeter. You've now got various types of identities, including employees, contractors, partners, and even your customers, all needing access to these resources. The resources are no longer just your on-prem resources, but rather a mix of cloud apps, identity as a service platforms, so your Google, your Azure, your Amazon environments, your on-prem servers. Organizations must also think about API access, as these reside both on-prem and in the cloud. So as organizations modernize and continue to focus on digital transformation efforts, identity becomes the centerpiece that allows the users to interact with the businesses, technology, as well as other people. Gartner lists identity-first security as their 2021 top 10 security trends, and they specifically state that identity is now the de facto corporate network. So as you're researching about your zero trust security journey, you'll hear the concept of never trust, always verify. And you'll hear me say that a few times today. Identity is the first place to start and the foundational technology to get your organization progressing along that journey. Identity is the central point across users, devices, and networks. Centralized identity and access management ensures strong authentication across all resources everywhere. It reduces your attack surface and gives you visibility and control over API resources and supports rapid response to credential compromise. So I'll pause for a second. This all makes sense, pretty straightforward so far, right? Okay.
So far, so good.
Sorry, was there a question?
Nope, I just said so far, so good.
Okay, perfect. So what's the business goal? At a high level, what does zero trust look like? It's about making sure the right people have the right level of access to the right resources in the right context. In addition, it's making sure that access is assessed continuously. This is key for all identities, both workforce and consumer. The goal is to do all of this with the least friction while supplying the tightest security. So let's dig a little bit deeper here. When we look at a zero trust reference architecture, you can't think of zero trust as just one thing. It's bigger than one vendor or one solution. And yes, I'm coming from Okta, and I'm sitting here saying that you can't achieve zero trust with just Okta, and that's the truth. It's a complete architecture. There's a lot of pieces that go into zero trust. Let's first focus on the identity piece and how it is a key part of zero trust. When we think about zero trust, we tend to think about identities and users, but there's also devices and networks. How do each of these pieces interact? How do they work together to create a holistic approach to zero trust for organizations? Well, let's look at context. You start with this idea of the user and the device contributing context to your risk posture. This context is critical to your organization's compliance, but it's not everything. Organizations can use this context in conjunction with other third-party systems, feeding into a single identity system to allow your organization to create granular policies. If the device posture is changed, or if a user is accessing a system from an unmanaged device, you may want to change that user's access capabilities so they can access only a limited part of the application. You could also look at where users are accessing your system. If they're not coming in from the corporate network, maybe they shouldn't be able to access specific resources or applications. We can look at impossible travel within the application itself and lock resources down based upon it. So working tightly with your business stakeholders, you can determine what are acceptable risks for your users and use this to define access policies. Using your access data, you can compile risk scores that allow you to make data-driven decisions on when it's appropriate to require increased or stepped-up authentication. Questions you need to consider are, when are you going to limit that access? When are you going to deny access? When are you going to apply specific access policies? Likewise, the opposite holds true. When are you going to allow easier, more streamlined access into specific resources? Having compiled data allows you to apply the right level of access to the right resources which the users need to access. This access extends beyond applications, extending these policy decisions to APIs and even infrastructure. So the key is making sure the loop is closed by collecting and analyzing that relevant data to establish contextual patterns. Once we understand as expected patterns, we can more easily spot abnormal behavior from a particular user. Are they trying to access resources they haven't before? Or are they that they don't normally, I can't speak today, or that they don't normally try to access? By feeding that information to the identity system and pairing it with the analytics and orchestration tools, you'll be able to rapidly get the right insights and take action to remediate. Those steps may be as simple as limiting access until they've stepped up authentication requirements, or as drastic as quarantining that user. Zero trust means granting the least amount of access a user needs to perform required tasks. This contextual data gives your organization a holistic picture of what's going on in their ecosystem, and it is key to recognizing automatically countering potential threats. So I talked a lot there and brought up this reference infrastructure. Are there any questions regarding this? Quiet group today. All right, I'm going to finish early. So let's dive deeper into that contextual piece then. Excuse me. It's this contextual access that allows your organization to really move towards zero trust. By analyzing the network, device, and location of both the user and the application, you can provide the proper level of access to your identities. This is key to all identities, including both workforce and consumer. It's this contextual information that determines the amount of friction given to that identity as they access applications and resources. It's also the key towards implementing a passwordless experience for your users. So I'll dive in. I'm almost done with the slides, people. We're going to get into the whiskey real soon. So to reiterate, the core principle of zero trust is never trust, always verify. And I'm going to repeat that earlier slide again. This ensures the right people have the right level of access to the right resources and the right context. That access is assessed continuously, all without adding friction for the user. This level of trust doesn't happen overnight. And as organizations implement the zero trust architecture, We've seen several stages of infrastructure maturity, and we're going to walk through them right now. So stage 0, I guarantee you everybody on this call is familiar with this stage. Many organizations begin their zero trust journey with a variety of on-prem and cloud apps that are in no way integrated together. They have on-prem directories such as AD. They have siloed applications with their own user directories. This results in IT being forced to manage disparate identities across numerous applications and systems, as well as many applications and services used without IT's awareness. From a user's perspective, this means numerous and most likely insecure passwords, or even worse, weak shared passwords across disparate systems. Without visibility and ownership over these fragmented identities, IT and security teams are left with potentially large windows for attackers to exploit. So what's the first step in this? It's really about resolving the security gaps left open by those fragmented identities and consolidating under one IAM system for both your on-prem and cloud resources. This stage 1 consolidation, supported primarily through single sign-on, is critical to managing access. It shouldn't be limited solely to employees, but instead any user that needs access to a service. As the previous slide showed, this includes the full extended enterprise of employees, contractors, partners, and all of your other identity types. Layering a second factor of authentication to that single centralized identity further helps to mitigate attacks targeting credentials. Additionally, unifying access policies across applications as well as servers is a critical part of IT infrastructure. It's key to bring IAM together into one secure, manageable place for IT. Now, I should say this maturity curve I mentioned earlier, I've worked for 3 major IAM vendors. We all have very similar slides that went over this. So this is not Okta specific. This is what you're going to see no matter who you talk to as far as that maturity. But because I do work for Okta, I'll tell you how Okta fits into the stage. We help organizations achieve this unified IAM through our SSO and multi-factor authentication capabilities, as well as by utilizing our universal directory. Users, regardless of type, will have a single consolidated identity for access to all their applications and resources, and IT will have a single source of truth, allowing them to integrate with multiple AD environments and user data stores across the enterprise. Any questions on stage 1 before I jump into the next one? I'm going to get a drink of water while I wait. No? Okay, good. So the next stage, I'll click my mouse here, in zero trust security is layering in that context-based access policies. This means gathering rich signals about a user's application, device, location, network context, and applying access policies that increase or decrease friction. Organizational roles can be tied to groups to apply policies based on those roles. An example might be that a high-value target, such as a C-level executive, would be required to use biometric-based authentication as opposed to something like SMS text to securely authenticate to applications containing sensitive corporate data. Furthermore, if a user leaves or changes a role within the organization, automated provisioning ensures that that user has access only to the tools he or she needs to do their work. In the case of a departure, the automated provisioning revokes all access, mitigating the risk of orphaned accounts or latent access after a departure. Finally, these rich access controls should be extended to all technology used by the organization, including, once again, and I've mentioned this a few times, that secure access to APIs that are the building blocks of modern apps and can expose sensitive data to the web if not properly protected. Now, once again, tying this back to Okta, many organizations today utilize Okta's adaptive MFA to accomplish this context-based access. We process a variety of contextual insights about the user, device, location, network, and the application or browser the resource is being accessed from. The Okta policy framework can apply the right policy. This response is based on an organization's risk tolerance, which acts as the first line of defense in keeping an organization secure. This contextual access benefits both the user and IT. For users, it means only prompting for that second factor during risky authentication attempts, and not every time. Of course, Okta's lifecycle management capabilities allow an organization to automate the provisioning and deprovisioning of user identities. So as we look and we move across the stage, we've got one more stage as far as the maturity curve, and that's that adaptive workforce. The final stage of zero trust extends the organization's focus on authenticating and authorizing access. But what does this mean? Well, it means that authentication no longer just occurs at the front gate. So it's not just at the point of logging in, if you will, to an app, but continuously throughout the user's experience. This is supported once again through an adaptive risk-based assessment to identify potential threats. Organizations are adding an intelligent risk-based engine to the contextual responses from stage 2 here. Going beyond the discrete policies set in the prior stage, IT can now set risk tolerance and allow their risk scoring based on those contextual signals. This determines the riskiness of a particular authentication event and potentially prompts for that second factor of authentication. The key here is that this trust is no longer absolute. This adaptive authentication is continuously monitored for a change in one of those signals, re-prompting for authentication and authorization verification should an aspect of that user's context change. Now, if I'm sounding a little off here, I'll give you an example. Say I'm in my office, logged into my computer on the corporate network, logged into Salesforce because I'm really behind keeping my information up to date. I'm hungry, I want to run across the street to Starbucks, so I grab my laptop and I head over. Now I fire up my laptop at Starbucks and I'm getting prompted to re-authenticate again. The context of my authentication has changed and I'm now on an external network. Therefore, I'm asked to re-authenticate before continuing my work. Simply put my fingerprint down on the reader or do whatever is required to authenticate, and I continue with my work within Salesforce. That's what continuous authentication is all about. It's constantly analyzing, recognizing when something changes, and then taking the appropriate action based upon the perceived risk. So while security has increased through these intelligent risk-based access controls, the experience for the end user is ultimately being simplified, allowing for frictionless access, which includes that passwordless authentication. Make sense? Perfect. So,
hey, Jason, I wasn't sure if you're going to move away from this screen, but I do have a quick question for you.
Yeah, I was going to say one little more thing, but go ahead.
Oh, go for it. No,
Yeah.
I'll let you finish up.
Yeah, all I was going to say is Okta, just tying this back to Okta once again, it allows those administrators to use the policies to transform the end user's authentication experience. It includes completely removing the password from the authentication flow, replacing passwords with an alternate factor, such as using our Okta Verify app or utilizing a YubiKey hardware device as that primary factor of authentication. It gives administrators choices. They can set risk-based authentication policies that require step-up authentication based on risk tolerance using varied signal inputs. If confidence is high that a user is who they say they are, that user is prompted for that first non-factor password or non-password factor and nothing else. So as you look at this curve, think about where you're at today. The reality and what our research has showed is that most organizations do sit right now between stage 0 and stage 1 of the zero trust maturity curve. However, quite a few organizations, if not all organizations, are actively looking to adopt that never trust, always verify approach to their IT security. So what was that question?
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate, you reviewing this information with us. And as you moving more towards the stage 3 with the risk-based access policy, is that customizable in the sense that we can actually make changes for that policy, or is that just built into Okta sort of in your intelligence?
Oh, no, it's absolutely customized. You're going to tailor because your risk tolerance level for your organization
Exactly.
might be completely different than another organization's risk tolerance. So everything from determining whether you're stepping up authentication, requiring higher secure levels of MFA to blocking access, you're going to tailor that experience based upon your needs.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other
Jason?
questions?
Hi, it's Michelle. So with that, to kind of piggyback, does Okta offer a multi-business unit, like a federated model? Like there's users, there's administration, there's IT teams?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. We offer federation models, and we do offer different models where you can have different groups or different cohorts of user types that go through different levels of security checks and authentication workflows, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, and they could be managed, from the same group, single pane of glass kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you've got that single Okta admin console to where, depending upon your administrative level of access, you have insight and the ability to configure and manage those user populations appropriately. So the nice thing about our solution is that you don't have just a single admin account that gives everybody access to everything. You can have your super user that controls the entire environment. You can have users that can only manage certain subsets of users or groups. You can have admins that only manage the application integrations. We're very flexible in that regard, but you still have that single pane of glass view.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so as far as the comment that I just saw, will it work across tablets and phone, Apple and Android? Absolutely. So when you dig deeper into the admin console of our solution and you're building these access and these contextual policies, we have the ability to look to see if you are coming in from a desktop, a Windows desktop or a Windows laptop, a MacBook, a iOS device, an Android device, or I think we even have a catch-all other, and you can define what that authentication flow and what that risk tolerance is going to be based upon what device you're coming in from and whether that device is managed or not. So we have the ability to look into those devices and see if they've already been registered to the user natively with the Okta solution, or we work inherently with different MDN solutions like Workspace ONE and Microsoft Intune to recognize which devices are managed versus unmanaged and how secure those devices are. So who a devices to, I'd have to look into the details as far as the manufacturer of the devices. I know we can look at the OS, the iOS or Android, Windows, Mac, but as far as actual hardware devices, I'd have to look into that and see what we can and can't expose natively. Other questions? Perfect. Well, I appreciate it. I'm glad people are talking other than me here. So honestly, I think I've got one slide left, and that's really my take behind my lead behind is, as we wrap it up, I just want to end with this. There's only one network in the world anymore. You can't control it, and it's consumed at will. Modern security requires an architecture transformation, moving away from that network to identity as a perimeter. And securing the identity is going to be the key to unlocking that zero trust. So with that, I can take any last minute questions. Looks like we still have about 4 or 5 minutes before we were planning to kick into the